Hey guys, here we are. Welcome to the second video. You may have noticed this beautiful city behind me. I decided that instead of showing you my small home office, I would show you some of the places that I've lived or spent a lot of time in. So go ahead and guess where I am and I'll tell you at the end of the topic. All right, so we're gonna discuss production costs in this video. This is maybe one of the most important topics in the section because everything is going to build on this. We're going to be using costs to help us think about how firms behave in different types of markets and what that means for society as a whole. So production costs is kind of essential to understanding this whole section of the course. We're going to describe a firm's costs in a variety of different ways. In this video, we're going to focus on 3 different cost concepts. That's going to be total cost, marginal cost, and average total cost. And total cost, it's probably the simplest here, is basically just all of the costs associated with production added up. Okay, remember last time we talked about fixed inputs and variable inputs. We want to think about how those different types of inputs and the costs associated with those inputs affect firm behavior. And with total costs, though, we're just going to be adding up all of the costs across all of the different inputs. All right, so total cost is just equal to fixed cost plus variable cost. Marginal cost is going to be kind of the most important cost in terms of deciding how much a firm is going to produce. So marginal cost is the additional cost for each additional unit produced. And remember, way back to the first topic, right? We always want to make decisions based on the marginal costs and marginal benefits going forward at the point of decision. So marginal cost is going to be really important for us. And we want to draw a distinction between marginal cost and average total cost. Average total cost is the average total cost across all of the units being produced. Okay, so this is the average cost per unit. All right, whereas marginal cost is going to be the additional cost associated with one additional unit of production. All right, so we'll see how to calculate these now in an example that's got some numbers. Okay, and we're actually going to introduce one more cost concept in the next video, or maybe in 2 videos. Sorry, I'm still getting used to this format here. But for now, we'll focus on these 3. So in this example, we've got a small bakery, and that bakery has 2 different costs. A variable cost, which is the amount that they pay each baker, and a fixed cost, which is their rent. Now, remember back to the last video, variable inputs vary with production. So if I want to produce more cakes, I'm going to have to hire more bakers. Fixed costs do not vary with production. Okay, so no matter how many cakes I produce or however many bakers I hire, my rent is always the same. So we can start to fill in this table then with fixed cost, okay, and variable cost. My fixed cost, no matter how much I produce, is going to be $20. And the information that's provided here in the table is really our production function, the relationship between our variable input, labor, and our output, that's cakes. So our variable cost is going to depend on how much labor we hire or how many bakers we employ. So our variable cost will be equal to the number of bakers times the cost of each one, which is $60. So if I hire no bakers, I have no labor costs. If I hire one baker, I have to pay $60. Two bakers is $120. Three bakers would be $180, right? And so on. That's my variable cost. And then to get total cost, we're just going to add those together. So we'll add up the fixed cost and the variable cost for each of these possible points of production. All right, so we've got our total cost that's equal to our fixed cost plus our variable cost. And then using our total cost, we're going to be able to calculate both the marginal cost and the average total cost for this firm. So remember, marginal cost is change in total cost divided by change in quantity. And we're going to talk about the numerator and the denominator of this fraction differently. But basically, what we want to know is if we're going to produce a couple more cakes, how much are those cakes going to cost? So the numerator here, okay, change in total cost. And if I look at, right, increasing production from 0 bakers to 1 baker, or 1 baker to 2 bakers, right, my total cost as I move down this table from one row to the next is always going to be $60, right? The difference is always $60 because the only difference between these rows is that I'm hiring one more baker and each baker costs me $60. So this change in total cost is always going to be equal to the cost per worker in these problems, which in this case is $60. The denominator of this fraction is the change in quantity. So now we're wondering, as I hire each additional baker, how much more output does that produce? And that is marginal product, if you remember back to the last video. So here what we're going to do is say, all right, as I hire the first baker, that baker costs me $60, but can produce 20 cakes. So the marginal cost, or the cost of producing the first 20 cakes, is going to be 60 over 20, or $3 per cake. Now we can't really calculate marginal cost for 0 bakers because we've made no cakes and the cost per cake is kind of a moot point. Okay, so if I now think about going from 1 baker to 2 bakers, again, that's going to increase my cost from 80 to 140. That's $60 in the numerator. All right, and then the denominator is going to be the change in output. The second baker produces an additional 15 cakes, which gives me a marginal cost of 4. So I'm going to just keep doing that here as we go down the table. I've got now 60 divided by 10 is 6. 60 divided by 5 is 12, and 60 divided by 3 is 20. Right, so I've got my marginal cost here, and one thing I want you to notice about marginal cost is that it is increasing. Marginal cost will always be increasing because we've assumed diminishing returns to scale, or in other words, our marginal product is decreasing. We have increasing marginal cost due to the decreasing marginal product, right? Because each baker produces a smaller number of cakes as the fixed inputs become crowded, then the cost of producing cakes is going to increase the more cakes that I'm producing. Okay. Good. So we're going to look and see what those look like on the graph here in a minute. But before we do, the last thing we need to calculate is average total cost. This is cost per unit. And I'm actually not going to have you calculate average total cost in your problem sets, but we are going to be looking at average total cost in graphs quite a bit in this section. So as I introduce these cost concepts, I just want to be clear, giving you examples about what it is and what it means. So in this example, we are going to calculate average total cost. That's just total cost divided by quantity. Tells me on average, how much does each cake cost? So here, again, we can't do that for 0 cakes, but if I hire 1 worker, I produce 20 cakes, then my total cost is going to be 80. I've got 20 cakes, and my average total cost is 4. Okay, the next one is going to be 140 over 35, which is also 4. I've got 200 over 45, and here I'm just rounding to the 1 decimal place to give you a sense of what this looks like. 260 over 50 is 5.2, and 320 over 53 is 6. All right. So we've got our average total cost and marginal cost and total cost all calculated in the table. And in the next video, we're going to take these numbers and start to talk about how we can use that information to describe the firm's behavior. But in this video, I really want to focus on thinking about what these cost curves look like. So the next thing we're going to do is to graph the cost curves. Okay, we're going to graph total cost on one graph here. We're going to put total cost, and I'll label this axis by 50s. And then on the other graph, we're going to put both average total cost and marginal cost, and I'm going to label this axis by 3s. And then what I want you to focus on here is just understanding the basic shape of these curves, because we are going to be using both these table problems like we have in this topic, but then in topic 11, we're going to start looking at graphs. And I want you to recognize that the table problems and the graph problems are exactly the same, okay? They're the same information, just presented in 2 different forms. So when we've got total cost here, okay, if we produce nothing, total cost is not 0, right? Total cost is 20 here if we have 0 output. Then notice the x-axis is cakes. This is cakes. So we're going to skip on over to 20 cakes, and that's going to give me a total cost of 80. Then we've got 35 cakes for a total cost of 140. 45 cakes is 200. 50 cakes is 260. 53 cakes is 320. All right. So now the table problem gives you discrete numbers, right? Here we have a discrete production function. We can hire 1 worker or 2 workers, but not 1.5 workers. In the graph, we're going to just pretend that this is continuous so that I can connect the points here so that you can just get a sense of what this line would look like if we had a continuous production function, okay? So here we go. Right? We have increasing function here, an increasing cost function. Total cost goes up, obviously, the more you produce, but the important point here is that it's getting steeper and steeper and steeper, right? The additional cost of each unit is also increasing. And if you've had calculus, you can see that your marginal cost is actually the slope of the total cost function, okay, or the derivative of the total cost function with respect to quantity, okay? If you have no calculus, that's fine, don't worry. I'm gonna plot marginal cost and average total cost now on these graphs over here. So, whoops, let me just get to a good place here. Okay, so if I hire one worker, I make 20 cakes. The marginal cost per cake is 3. Then I've got 35, 4, 45, 6, 50 is all the way up to 12, and then 53 is all the way up here to 20. So our marginal cost function here is increasing, right? This is the additional cost of each additional unit of output. Then we're going to plot average total cost. Let's do straight black here. So our average total cost is going to be 4, and then 4, then just a tiny bit more than 4, then 5.2, and then 6. All right, so I'm going to graph average total cost. There, I've got my line like this. Now, the important thing to notice here, which is not maybe entirely clear from this graph, but hopefully it's a little bit clear from this graph, is that the average total cost curve is going to intersect the marginal cost curve at the minimum of the average total cost curve, okay? So your average total cost curve is usually going to look like a U shape, okay? And at the very bottom of that U, that's the minimum, the very lowest point, that is where it will intersect your marginal cost curve, okay? So that's the typical way that we'll draw the graphs. You won't really be drawing these graphs, but I will show you graphs and you will be reading information off the graphs. They will always look like that. And the fact that it intersects at the minimum, that it's a general property of the marginal and average functions. It's not specific to costs. It applies to all marginal and average functions. But it will be useful to us when we try to interpret how different markets impact consumers in the future topics. Okay, so I just want to note here, right? The main takeaways are marginal cost is always increasing, and that's because we have decreasing marginal product, and the average total cost curve will intersect marginal cost at its minimum, right? Good. So then the last thing I want to do in this video is just to help practice reading numbers off of this table, because basically we have a couple different types of problems in this section. Here in this topic, we're focused mostly on the table problems, and like I said, in the next topics, we'll be looking more at the graphs. So let's return to the table and just practice reading some numbers off the table. So our first question here is, what is the total cost of producing 35 cakes? All right, so all I have to do is find 35 cakes here. In order to produce 35 cakes, I've got to hire 2 workers. And I'm going to come over to my total cost column here, and I see that the total cost of that would be $140. Right. So the total cost of producing 35 cakes, that includes both my marginal cost, my variable cost and my fixed cost, that will total $140. The next question is a little trickier. What is the marginal cost of producing the 40th cake? Marginal cost of producing the 40th cake. When you look here at your cakes column, and there is no 40 here, right? So the first thing we have to think about is, who produces the 40th cake? Okay. So this here tells me the number of cakes I get depending on how many workers I hire. So I see if I hire 2 workers, I'm only getting 35 cakes. The third worker will produce the 40th cake, right? The third worker produces cake number 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, so on. So the first thing that I need to note here is that the third worker produces the 40th cake. Oops. And then I can come over across here. Third worker is producing the 40th cake. And what is the marginal cost of that cake? It is $6. Okay. Perfect. Right. Now for one that's a little bit simpler, what's the average total cost of cakes if you hire 5 workers? Okay, so I've hired 5 workers, I produced 53 cakes. On average, each of those cakes will cost $6 to produce. So the average total cost of hiring 5 workers, the average cost per cake will be $6. Now notice that the marginal cost of those cakes is much higher, right? The marginal cost of the cakes produced by the 5th worker is $20 per cake, right? So average total cost will be useful, but so is marginal cost. They tell us 2 different things about the firm's cost structure, and they can help us think in 2 different ways about the firm's behavior. All right, good. So that's the end of this page. Next time, we're going to go over, we're going to use the same numbers, and we're going to start to think about how we can use these cost concepts to predict firm behavior. All right, good. Hope this is working for you. This is like the 5th time I've recorded this video, so hopefully this one's working for me too. If you have questions, please write them down, go to the discussion forums, send me an email, right? Come to my virtual office hours. Be proactive, reach out, get help. I know this is a trying time for all of us, but we can be here for each other. All right, I will see you in the next video. I hope you're having a great day.